So today we're going to be talking about Paul's Case, written by Willa Cather. Willa Cather is one of my favorite ever writers, probably the best, most auspicious, I think, and illustrious, let's call it that, of American writers, I believe. She has written about so many different segments of society and often with an ethical outlook. She began wrongly and she published her first novel when she's about 40 years old and continued to write 11 more. But she started wrongly because she wrote about an engineering feat called Alexander's Bridge, kind of based on the Brooklyn Bridge. That was not her subject area or her material. It was sort of a novella. So the next novel she got to write, Oh Pioneers, which is about the Nebraska plains where she grew up, hated, left as soon as she could, went to private high school in Lincoln, then went on to University of Nebraska in Lincoln. But when she returned home, she realized one time after spending time, by the way, in Pittsburgh, where the story's set, teaching high school. She returned once and she thought, why have I left all this behind? This is where my roots are, and this is where my life began. So then with Oh Pioneers, which is an interesting book because a woman is given the run of a farm, not the two oldest sons. It's called primogeniture. It comes from Europe, that the oldest son would get everything, and the younger son would have to, bargain with him maybe. But in this particular novel, the father realizes the two older sons aren't going to do right. So he turns the entire farm over to his daughter, his younger daughter, and she manages so well that she builds up one of the best farms in that area of Nebraska. Unfortunately, her brother, younger brother, real young brother, born later, gets involved with one of the Bohemian girls who's unfortunately married to somebody else. So there's a tragic ending to that particular novel. And then, but the one that probably everybody knows, My Antonia. Anybody read that? It's about the necessity of the womanhood on the plains. They settled the life there on the plains and kept the men going. And it's a beautiful story too about this particular woman, Antonia. So then there's also the Song of the Lark. It's about an opera singer, a woman from the country who became an opera singer because Cather was always interested in opera and the arts, as Paul is in Paul's Case. Let's see what else then. A Death Comes for the Archbishop, about Archbishop Lamy in Santa Fe, who started one of the early churches there, and now there's a cathedral he built back then. Some of the early churches in the U.S., Catholic churches, were established in the 1600s. I don't know if you all know that. Before even Europeans arrived, these came from Spain, who'd settled the Central and South America earlier, and were moving up then into the U.S., both in Florida and Santa Fe area. So this is about that archbishop. Then The Professor's House. It's about a professor who's established and has a good job, but his daughters sort of take everything away from him, and the one person he likes is called Tom Outland. And there's a beautiful set piece, about 60 pages in the middle of that novel, about Tom Outland, his best friend, student, discovering a Pueblo cliff face that nobody had discovered before. So there are all these different kinds of stories she's written, including Shadows on the Rock, which is the settling of Quebec back in the 1600s. And again, one of the central figures, as in the Death Comes for the Archbishop, is a priest. So she was interested in the Catholic or Anglo-Catholic side of things and always wrote with an ethical attitude about matters, as we see here in Paul's Case. Oh yeah, I was going to mention all those women poets I brought up the other day, and I forgot to mention this one by Emily Dickinson. You all know who she is, right? Okay, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd banish us. How dreary to be somebody. How public. Like a frog to tell your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. The reason I like that one is that sort of like social media to like a frog to tell your name the livelong day to an admiring bog. Okay, so today the story that we're going to look at then is, boy, it's a long history. But, so because I admire her so much, I've read all her novels, all her short stories, and then her first book was a book of poetry, 4 books of short stories, a couple of books of commentary on fiction. Uh, the novel "The Mule" with the furniture removed is one of her outstanding essays. Get rid of all the junk in a novel and just tell the story. Okay, so Paul is a case. It used to be what a case that kid is. Anybody still use that phrase? What a case? No, I don't think so. But he's also a psychological case, and, and say a case for psychoanalytic study, and he gets involved in a case of theft, and there's going to have to be a adjudicated case by a railroad company about something that's happened, as you all know if you read the story. So the story opens with Paul appearing before the faculty of his high school because he's been blackballed. Anyway, he's not there. He's not attending right now. We learn that right away. In the first paragraph, that he had to appear before the faculty of the Pittsburgh High School to account for his various misdemeanors. Note that she uses that right away because he's going to get involved in felony. And then a bit worse also. Ooh, somebody's little phone went tweet tweet. Maybe it was mine. Anyway, so the principal asked Paul, why are you here? And Paul says, well, I want to return to school, and the text says that's a lie. He doesn't want to come back to school. And Paul finds lying, the text says, indispensable. It's a way of avoiding friction. If he runs into a problem, he tells a lie. He makes up a story. The English teacher especially lays into him, the text says. Boy, because he was writing on the board and she was going to correct something and I guess touched me. He didn't like that. And so she has a lot of bad things to say about Paul. But the text goes on to say they all fell upon him without mercy. And it could be because, as the first paragraph describes, he's kind of dressed up. His clothes are a little ratty, but he has a red carnation. Remember that red carnation in his buttonhole, and that's one of the text says that might be one of the reasons they all kind of fall on him in that way, because it's just a little bit too much for those teachers. So the principal, though, seems sympathetic, and he finally lets him go. But the one who really has the best insight is the drawing master, who says, I don't really believe that smile of his comes altogether from insolence. There's something sort of haunted about it. The boy is not strong, for one thing. I happen to know that he was born in Colorado only a few months before his mother died out there of a long illness. There's something wrong about the fellow. That's a good assessment, and often people observe other people, and of course, artists, painters, drawers do, and they see oftentimes in the attitude a person strikes something about their personality. They can tell that. So this is what the drawing instructor is saying. And growing up without a mother, is probably comparable to growing up without a father. If you grow up without a father, there's 40 some percent more likely to get in trouble with the police. That's just a common American statistic. And then growing up without a mother, I think, as you see in Paul, lack make causes him to have any lack of empathy or real feeling for other people. And I believe that the absence of a mother from birth, basically, could bring that about. So he leaves the juridical assessment of him by the faculty, and he hurries to Carnegie Hall, where he's on duty as an usher. By the way, Dale Carnegie was one of the wealthy magnates of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was the steel center of America at the time. A lot of wealthy men were there. The manufacturers of steel, steel foundry, steel casting, all steel matters were pretty much centered in Pittsburgh at the time. That's why it's part of the Rust Belt, as it's called now, because the steel went down the drain. Started buying it from China. Anyway, so Dale Carnegie funded a lot of things. Libraries across America. Anybody live in a town where there's a Carnegie Library? I know there's some in Iowa, Montana, Michigan. Gotta look around. And probably other places. I've been to them there. And here it seems that he's set up a looks like an art gallery and a opera house, both in one spot. Because we know it's a gallery because Paul goes there and he's exhilarated by the paintings he's looking at, particularly one. And then he goes to put on his usher's uniform, and he seems not the favorite among the other ushers. He isn't well loved by them either, sort of like the faculty. And if you note on 182, he was always considerably excited while he dressed. He's getting his suit on. Ushers then, even into the 60s at movie theaters, wore uniforms, often with epaulets on the shoulders and gold braid on them and that kind of stuff. So he was always considerably excited while he dressed, twanging all over to the tuning of the strings and the preliminary flourishes of the horns in the music room. They're getting ready to play for the evening. But tonight he seemed quite beside himself, and he teased and plagued the boys until, telling him that he was crazy, they put him down on the floor and sat on him. People do that anymore? I don't think so. But people used to. Take down that gun and sit on him. However, he was a model usher, the text says, and he's even able to handle the English teacher who berated him worse in that meeting. But when she comes in, she's been given free tickets, he figures. She's dressed horribly, not dressed for the evening, the occasion, and he realized she doesn't understand how she should be dressed to be coming to this performance. But anyway, he seats her, and then he goes back and sits in the seat in the back. And when the music begins, this curious description falls in place. He loses himself as he did in front of the paintings, but and the painting was the Rico. It was not that symphonies as such meant anything particular to Paul, but the first sigh of the instrument seemed to freeze some hilarious and potent spirit within him. It's an interesting description. Hilarious and potent spirit was freed by just the tuning of the instruments as they're getting, or as the playing begins. Now the playing is starting in the actual symphony or opera or selections, probably from operas, it seems. was going on that evening because there'd be an opera singer from Germany who's present, soloist, and maybe this hilarious and potent spirit. If you remember when he's talking to the faculty, high school faculty at the beginning, it said that in his eyes, they see a hysterically defiant manner, hysterically defiant, uh, and there's a certain hysterical brilliancy in his eyes, which convey that hysteric, defiant manner. So the music goes on, and then he waits outside afterward the performance to see the German singer, the woman, take a carriage to this nearby Shenley Hotel. Shenley is he's a big whiskey maker. So there was a lot of capitalistic enterprises taking place in Pittsburgh at this time, much more so even than, say, Philadelphia, which is more genteel. So he waits outside to see this German soloist go to her hotel, and he has a kind of a detailed fantasy, like Mademoiselle Loisel of the necklace, about the beauty of inside and what goes on there and how the food is served and all that. Then he's shocked to find himself standing in the slush in a gravel driveway, the water coming into his shoes, boots. So he takes a car home. Is this an automobile? The text says he takes a car home. Is that on? What? What is it? It's a streetcar. Streetcar tracks run through a lot of these eastern cities. Some western cities too. So that's the car. It's a streetcar, and we get intimations of it later too when his father gives him fare for a streetcar run. Okay, so he's shocked to find that he's standing in this cold slush in a gravel driveway with his boots leaking. So he takes that streetcar home, and once there, he can't stand the idea of going into his bedroom because he sees hanging on the wall is a picture of George Washington and also John Calvin. I don't know if you know who John Calvin is. He's the fomenter, one of the fomenters of Presbyterianism. Pittsburgh has been, is now, I think, pretty much a Presbyterian city. Presbytery means a presbyter is an older person. Presbyopia means you got old eyes. It happens at about 42, 43, if you haven't had trouble with your eyes before. They don't move as well. So Presbyterian meant they had elders who ran the church, is really what it meant. So anyway, John Calvin's picture's there, and he doesn't want to go there. Also, a greasy box where he keeps his collars. People wore shirts then, and separate from them were sort of celluloid collars that clipped to the shirt. And Paul has a four in hand and a pin in his tie below that collar when he's talking to the faculty there in the high school. So also in his room, I want you to note that there's a framed motto. It says, worked in worsted, that's a kind of cloth, by his mother. What does it say? Feed my lambs. Who said that? Jesus. Feed my lambs. Feed my sheep. This is like her communication as a word to him, but it falls flat because she's not there to say it. And the next day after church, because he has to attend church, there were these many families sitting out on the stoops. It's pretty common practice in cities back then, even into the 70s, maybe even in the 80s. After that, you had to watch it. Couldn't just sit out on the step. The stoop is the steps that lead down from, like, say, a brownstone village. But I also should say that when he doesn't want to go to his own bedroom, so he's afraid he'll wake his father and have to explain his lateness. So he finds an open basement window at the back of the house, and he lets himself in there and settles down in a box kind of in front of the furnace. Or he kind of settles in because he thinks this. Suppose his father had heard him getting in at the window and had come down and shot him for a burglar. So he must have a pistola. Then again, suppose his father had come down pistol in hand and he had cried out in time to save himself, and his father had been horrified to think how nearly he had killed him. Then again, suppose a day should come when his father would remember that night and wish there had been no warning cry to stay his hand. In other words, he would have shot him. These are all going through his mind. And with this last supposition, Paul entertained himself until daybreak, thinking that maybe his father would later regret that he hadn't shot him. So the next day after church, all the family sitting out in the stoops, Paul's father points out this successful young man, and it's his father's dearest hope that Paul will be like him. Anybody ever get that from your parents? Oh, I wish you were like... No, that's good. Oh, you should be so much like your older brother. No. Oh, your young sister's so nice about her, the way she handles her clothes and everything. You're just a mess. Stuff like, nobody gets that kind of stuff. Oh, okay, he does.
I get little stuff like that.
Oh, well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But here it seems
You hate it.
Yeah, but here it seems like he wants, he thinks his son is a failure if he's not like this guy.
Right.
And
Right.
in my family, it's like little things. It's just like she tells my sisters, why can't you be more like Sydney? She listens to me, or something like that. That's
Right,
just
there you
little
go.
things, not like big futuristic, like you're a disappointment if you're not held up to this standard.
No, I'm not saying that. It's just, kids get a lot of those little things.
Yeah, that's very true.
I wish you'd grow up to be big and strong like your Uncle Dick. Stuff like that. Kids hate it. It causes rebellion. That can be the cause of rebellion. Okay, anyway. But this fellow his father wishes he's like, tells a story about how his boss is in the Mediterranean, but he manages to keep so busy that two stenographers have to be hired to keep up with him. Probably he's sending telegrams. There was not intercontinental telephone service then, but there were telegraphs. Okay. So this young guy is talking about somebody over in the Mediterranean, and then Paul's father talks about the electric plant in Cairo, and Paul snapped his teeth. He had an awful apprehension that they might spoil it all, that is, spoil these foreign places, before he got there. Yet he rather liked to hear these legends of the Iron Kings. That's the people who ran these big iron steel industries in Pittsburgh, that were told and retold on Sundays and holidays, of these stories of palaces in Venice, yachts on the Mediterranean, and high play at Monte Carlo. And all this appeals to Paul's fantasies. So this is when Paul asks for car fare to go study with his friend. He's going to study geometry with a friend. This is another lie. And his tight-fisted father doesn't want to give him money. He says, can't you find somebody closer that you could work with so you don't have to take the streetcar? So finally he coughs up the dime, which is probably the fare there and back. Does that seem like a little bit? Does that seem like too little? New York City in the 1960s, its subway fare was 15 cents. I think it's about $1.50 now. Dollar and a quarter, dollar and a half. But for 15 cents, you could go anywhere in the city. So a dime he gets. His father coughs it up, and of course he doesn't go to study, but he goes to visit this young man in a lead. He's the leading juvenile in a permanent stock company. That means a stock company of actors who's not going to leave the city. They're permanent. He's a permanent hire. They're not going to hire somebody else to play his part. He's the young ingenue, or he's the young male lead. The ingenue, I guess, would be the woman. He's a leading juvenile, which is like the woman who'd be an ingenue. Okay, this theater and Carnegie Hall for Paul, the text says, has all the allurement of a secret love. Note that it's not for a person or even a situation, but it's for things and places. That arouses this in Paul. He's a real case. Paul's teachers earlier said now that, but earlier they imagine he leads a kind of imaginary life from the wrong kind of reading, that he's reading the wrong kind of books. But then we're told he doesn't read. He doesn't like to read. So he doesn't get that form of art at all. Let's see. He felt no necessity to do any of these things. What he wanted was to see, to be in the atmosphere, float on the wave of it, to be carried out blue league after blue league away from everything. The blue league, leagues of the sea. Wanted to be carried away like that rather than focus on anything. So we get a view of Paul's lies even to his school chums now, later. What did he tell them? That he was going to Venice or Egypt. And when they didn't believe him because he came back Monday and had to go to class, he would say, well, my sister got sick, so I couldn't go. That's the depth of the lies that he's telling in school even, and that's why he's not liked by the people there either. So the upshot of all of this is the principal went to Paul's father, and Paul was taken out of school and put to work. He said, can't go to Carnegie Hall anymore, can't go visit this young actor where he's worked as kind of a dresser for him. That is, help him dress between changes of clothes, and when you have different exits and entrances in a play or a musical. So, and it goes on to say, they agreed with the faculty. The members of the stock company were amused when Paul's stories reached them, but they agreed with the faculty and with his father that Paul's was a bad case. What happens then? Bloomp. We got a little line back under that right there in that book at the end of that statement, and the next thing we wake up and Paul's riding a train. He's in a sort of a second-class carriage of a train, and you got to think, what's going on here? It's a real wise, creative move, because think of all the space she saved, Willa Cather saved, by instead of going through all the different things that went through his mind and what he's going to do, he just jumped to the new thing. It's got movement in it. He's on the train. Where is he going? The reader wonders what's up, why he's on the train, and you pick up reading. Then you want to read to find out what's happening. You read with more interest when there's that kind of break. So he gets off the train at Jersey City, and that's a station, and then he goes across to 23rd Street station, that's in Manhattan, Probably takes a ferry because there's a Hudson between New Jersey and Manhattan. By the way, if you notice 23rd Street Station, the numerals are written out by Willa Cather, not 23 RD, 23rd Street. That's how you do it for fiction also, besides essays. Okay, then he takes a cab. That would be a horse cab. It would not be automobiles yet. And goes around to different stores in Manhattan on a kind of a shopping spree. Then he goes to the Waldorf, which then was like the richest hotel, probably in Manhattan. And he takes a suite of rooms, 3 rooms, not just a room, a suite of rooms. So finally now, once he's settled there, Cather reveals what's happened. And this paragraph on 189 that his employers, Denny and Carson, a city in North Dakota, has trusted him to take their week's earnings to the bank to deposit them. And there was above $2,000 in checks and nearly $1,000 in bank notes, which he had taken from the book and quietly transferred to his pocket. In the bank, he'd made out a new deposit slip. His nerves had been steady enough to permit him his returning to the office where he could finish the day because he knew that the bank would not get the book they wanted it balanced according to the bank's records because they had their own balance. So the bank wouldn't be able to do that until Monday, so he knew he'd be free till then. And then he asked to have the long weekend off, not work Saturday. What's that? Everybody works 6-day weeks then, not 5-day. And now in France, it's 4-day week. You have the 10-day week. That's to work 4 days a week. Okay, so Paul enjoys the luxury of this room, and he orders up flowers. He goes to the hotel dining room, has a bit of champagne with his meal. That foamy, bubbly stuff gets up your nostrils, or can if you sniff it. It leads him to wonder, as he savors his champagne, how honest men exist in the world, seeing all that he has. Which is where Cather, I think you can say, puts down her ethical boot, as it were. The next day he meets a Yalie, that's what guys are called who go to Yale, who's actually from San Francisco, and they go out on a night on the town. Have a lot of fun. Paul wakes with a hangover the next morning. And then it's the 8th day that's the 8th day, and the Pittsburgh papers blare the whole story, what he's done, how much money he's stolen, all that. But they also say that his father paid back the money so he won't be prosecuted for this felony. And that much money, it definitely would be a felony. But Paul's uneasy. He dresses in his good clothes for dinner, and the music there reminds him of the sweet, swelling pleasure of wine and all that stuff. And he thinks he should have caught a steamer and gone overseas. But the impulse to do something immediately was so strong he had to do what he did. So his father, he finds, is in New York looking for him. And Paul figures, well, he'll go to the seedy hotels. You won't imagine I'm at the best. So he has a solution that he thought of earlier. Actually, he bought this instrument earlier, but the shining metal hurts his eyes, the text says. It's a revolver. He's thought of that early on. He bought it when he's buying all his clothes. So kind of seems to leave it there, and instead he takes a cab to the ferry. crosses to Newark, again over to New Jersey, and then he has another cab take him down the Pennsylvania tracks. Remember, he's come from Pittsburgh, so they're tracks that run down to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania tracks. So he has this cabbie, a horse cab, take him down these tracks out of town. And here he has a kind of a, I think you could call it a kind of a revelation, where he, the carnations in his coat were drooping with the cold. Remember, right at the start, he had a carnation in his buttonhole when he talked to the teachers. And then he's seen these flowers behind glass in Manhattan. So it was a losing game in the end, it seemed, this revolt against the homilies, the sermons by which the world is run. Paul took one of the blossoms carefully from his coat and scraped a little hole in the snow where he covered it up. Then he dozed a while from his weak condition, seemingly insensible to the cold. When you get insensible to the cold and start dozing off, you're about ready to be frozen to death. That's pretty much how death comes, by freezing. So then he has made a resolve. He starts watching an approaching locomotive, his teeth chattering, his lips drawn away from them in a frightened smile. Once or twice he glanced nervously sidewise, as though he were being watched. When the right moment came, he jumped. As he fell, the folly of his haste occurred to him. The folly of his haste occurred to him with merciless clearness, the vastness of what he had left undone. There flashed through his brain, clearer than ever before, the blue of Adriatic water, the yellow of Algerian sands, these foreign places he had not gone to. He felt something strike his chest, and that his body was being thrown swiftly through the air, on and on, immeasurably far and fast, while his limbs were gently relaxed. Then, because the picture-making mechanism was crushed, the disturbing visions flashed into black, and Paul dropped back into the immense design of things. So was part of the immense design, is Cather suggesting that this kind of end is foreordained in somebody with that sensibility, that kind of sensibility? Nowadays, we'd take him to Freud. He'd be young and Freudened. Or she's saying, is she wondering, can the sin of suicide be forgiven? What do you think? Anybody have an opinion?
I think God can forgive as He chooses. It depends on the state of your heart.
God can forgive as He chooses, Will says. It depends upon the state of your heart. Do you think that's so?
I feel like it also depends on the state of your mind. Sometimes that's basically what you're saying.
Yeah.
Heart. You said, "Oh, this is not what I wanted to do."
I think the heart encompasses consciousness.
Yeah, maybe the condition of depression bogs your better judgment. So, I mean, we can never really know, but maybe it was because there's three what's it called, prerequisites or whatever for mortal sin, and maybe one of those was clouded by depression.
The thing is about just about every suicide is it's been planned for months, if not years. For instance, I had a sort of a neighbor who was a real outgoing guy. I mean, he was an auctioneer and stuff like that. He committed suicide. He had spent years thinking about it, and he had a 20-page letter written to his wife how to take care of the land, exactly what tractors he used, how to take care of the cattle and the sheep and everything else. 20 pages he had written out for her to follow. So, and there are many books on suicide. Actually, one of my dearest editors tried to commit suicide but failed, and wrote about it. also, and so there are books about it. But what it is, it's always planned. Usually happens in the spring, like 60% of the time, something like that. But also around holidays. Though those times like Christmas and Thanksgiving, people usually just get depressed. And they come out, somehow pull out of it, maybe because there's gifts and there's turkey and stuff like that. But when a suicide has planned it, I don't know about that. I mean, I go like that. Yeah.
It's kind of like people said, like God can forgive whoever He wants. If the question is like if they deserve forgiveness, I mean it's no, but no one does.
Yeah, no one deserves forgiveness, and you're right. So, actually, God has entire foreknowledge since He's infinite and eternal. So He probably knew this kid was going to commit suicide. So, did He forgive him? I would say, yeah, probably. I would tilt that way, I think. Because He's God. He's filled with loving kindness. God is love. What do you think, Zachary? You think so?
I mean, it's possible, but you still have to consider like the other sin, stealing all the money.
But his father forgave him for that. I mean, his, physical father.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's complicated. And I think what I like is she doesn't give you the answer. You got to think about it.
Was she Catholic?
She didn't definitely, I don't think she ever, officially converted, but I know she attended services and also like the Anglican church too. The Anglo-Catholic kind. But she wrote about many Catholic archbishops and priests, and I understood them perfectly.